where we located all of our data and content. Well, it's certainly a big part of it, but clearly that's not the end case. And we try to paint like some end destination, which is kind of silly. Cloud is not a destination, nor do I want to say it's a journey, but ultimately it's just kind of a natural step for us, right? So ultimately, not only is security impacted, but how we operate, manage, and govern the cloud is, or cloud computing in general, is pretty interesting. So the guidance domain, again, was split up to address these exact concerns. We talk about architecture, we can understand what this thing looks like, how I can relate it to things I understand or don't, how I govern it. So we have, at this point, we smush some things together. So we've got governance and risk management. We smush together legal and electronic discovery, compliance and audit, information lifecycle management, this notion of portability and interoperability. And then on the operations side, these are things that you're used to seeing also in your enterprises. So there's very little. What we try to do is basically give you something you can hold on to and draw parallels between them, right? So it's trying to make it less alien. So we went from 15 down to 13 domains. I think I said 12 earlier, I meant 13. And each one of those has a lot of guidance as to what you should look for and what is important and maybe not so important when you move to cloud computing. So that's the guidance itself, and this is really just going down the stuff that Dov talked about. How are we doing on time? Okay. So we came up with this idea of thinking about, well, now that we understand the areas we need to focus on, what are the biggest risks, threats, and we're missing on vulnerabilities that exist as cloud as a model or an operational model is introduced. So we came up with these 7. This notion of shared technology vulnerabilities, which talks a lot about that multi-tenancy application and using common platforms that spread the compute networking storage out across multiple tenants, and what that means to the constituent users of that when something bad happens. If you remember Dan Geer and his SDK report on Microsoft about monocultures, right? Using a common platform across everything expands the attack surface. It means that ultimately if one bad thing happens, it affects lots of people. At the same point in time, the converse to this is you can also spread goodness out across all of these users in a very quick way too. But this is a very interesting and somewhat overlooked issue. Data loss and data leakage, pretty interesting and important set of concerns in many cloud environments, especially infrastructure as a service. You remember that line is drawn at the boundary of kind of above the hypervisor between what you are responsible for and what the cloud provider is responsible for. So they don't really care about your data. I mean, from the perspective of understanding whether it's going to the right people or not. Not that they don't care about the data. They care about the integrity and confidentiality of as a system. But really, when you think about it, they don't know what they shouldn't know, even what they talk about. They don't really understand what those VMs traffic in. They don't know whether that credit card number, if you happen to be using a cloud service, or more importantly, a social security number, should be accessed by the requesting party. And in many cases, for example, the security capabilities that are baked into these systems, if you take Amazon, for example, they provide firewall-like functionality in these security groups, which are kind of apples between these virtual tiers you can set up if you wish. So you could have, your web app, you could have your web servers, web app servers, and then say a database, right? You split it out that way. They provide inbound ACLs, but there's absolutely no outbound apples. So if you talk about exfiltration, I'm on that. You talk about exfiltration. What was that saying? Oh, wow, how about that? If you talk about exfiltration and leakage, unless you put something host-based on that machine to actually detect that capability, because it can't come in a network one, a network, DLP solution, for example, in a very easy way that you might in your enterprise. This is a big issue, right? How data is consumed and ultimately accessed. So malicious insiders is interesting from the perspective of cloud. That applies not only to your operators, but also the cloud operators, and the amount of trust, just like we've always done, but we've always had to put trust in our data in somebody else's hands. So this notion of what a malicious insider could do in a cloud environment, given access, is interesting. Account service, hijacking of traffic happens quite a bit, actually, and in many cases, actually I should frame that within the context of an internal enterprise. even in cloud, if you look at how some of the service operations work, you have basically one key, right? One key to rule them all, which is problematic, in as much as that is the keys to operating every single set of pieces of infrastructure in that cloud environment. And ultimately, this notion of what happens when that account is potentially compromised. We've seen phishing attacks and all sorts of things that make the normal sets of applications and web apps apply in ways that are exasperated by cloud. Insecure APIs. I talked about swinging dead cats. There are like 18 or 20 different groups working on APIs for management. There's some kind of de facto as well as de jure standards that people would like to talk about as it relates to multiple elements of cloud. Not a lot of them have security baked in or have enough security baked into them. And these APIs are what we're using to manage all of our cloud infrastructure. Right? So that's kind of a problem. The nefarious use of service. A couple years ago, back to the presentation I gave here, I talked about a whole slew of, at the time I thought they were kind of just fun names for new spins on old attacks. But for example, there's been a lot of discussion lately on something I called cloud bots or cloud botnets, which essentially is a natural separation of what we see with bot activity. But instead of having to compromise you on a drive-by, I can just steal some credit cards and spin up iterations of 20 highly powered, well-connected things sitting on a cloud service, and essentially use that as using a command and control channel, use that as my own private IDOM, right? So they take it down, I spin up another one. They take it down, I spin up another one. I think it was illustrated earlier that actually, from the perspective of clouds, the original botnet design was actually some of the first kind of definitions or use cases for cloud computing. But nefarious use, we see attacks being launched. There were 2 weeks ago massive denial of service attacks on SIP accounts. SIP connected machines on the internet coming from Amazon, right? And I don't mean to pick out Amazon, but they're used a lot because they have massive bandwidth, great options for large compute network and storage. And then I think that one of the biggest problems here is that people are trying to understand how they assess risk in cloud computing and what this means to them. And so if you don't have a risk assessment framework, you run around in circles wondering why it is you are having heartburn. But more importantly, if you do, you have to understand what multi-tenancy, what some of the things that are unique to cloud as it relates to the operational models means to you, and how you essentially include them in your risk assessment framework. So these were kind of taken as part of work that was done by the CSA as well as polls for the general user community, things that keep people up at night, and these were the top 7. I think, as we'll discover, how people have essentially ranked these out of those 7, you'll notice that it's kind of interesting, right? The whole focus here is what happens to my data. I'm very concerned about my data, and so it's no surprise that data loss and leakage is the number one, at least as part of the survey that was done, the number one concern. Management, abuse of service, all the way down to what's interesting to me is that people care or seem to worry less about shared technology vulnerabilities, and that's either a sign of maturity in that space or just blind trust, probably a mixture of both. But it'd be interesting. I mean, what do you guys see? I mean, if you had to vote, would your answers, do you think, would your first answer be data leakage and loss, or would it be something else? Pretty much, yeah. And I think that's the biggest concern when we think about how we're going to protect our data. The reality is, what most people realize is that, especially infrastructure as a service, it's still on you, right? Software as a service, we've been dealing with and have experienced failures and breaches there too. But for some reason, we don't make that separation very well in our discussions. When we talk about this, we lump everything into the word cloud. It gets very confusing as to when we talk about data loss and leakage, which one of these models is appropriate. That's going to ultimately map into how you deal with number 6. Right? So understanding those models and the protection schemes therein are pretty important. So we're going to rev this thing twice a year. And it'll essentially come from CSA participants. There's a bunch of judges that go through and also add their 2 cents. And then essentially the project team will be in charge of of revising this and or expanding it. Something